Meet PitchDB, the ultimate platform for speakers looking to make their mark on podcasts, conferences, and media outlets. PitchDB provides access to over 3 million platforms, ensuring you find the perfect avenue for your message. With AI integrations, your bios and pitches are tailored uniquely to each opportunity, giving you the edge you need. Join now at pitchdb.com.
Welcome to Your Brand Amplified, the podcast where we interview marketers, publicists, and brands to learn their stories, what makes them tick, and tips and tricks that make a difference. One of my favorite things about podcasting is meeting people who aren't just in my own town or state, but people who are around the world who are amazing marketers. And that is who I'm bringing to you today, Scott Bywater from Australia, who is one of the leading, most sought-after marketing copywriters in Australia. I'm very excited to have you here. Thank you, Scott, for getting up so early to be on the show.
No, you're welcome, Annika. It's really great to be here.
Fantastic. Well, email marketing is a tool that I always tell people is still such a valid way to communicate. But I think a lot of times we don't know how to execute email properly or even how to build up our email lists. And this is something I'm talking a lot about with my students at university right now. I teach in 2 graduate programs, and one of them is digital media management. And I keep emphasizing owned media, your website, your blog, your email list. And they say, we don't even know where to start. So before we get into creation and how you've created great systems to use AI to write highly converting emails in 7 minutes or less, which I need to know all of your tricks. But before we get into that, can you talk about your background? How did you get into marketing and specifically find your niche in email marketing?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I always had a passion, even as a kid, for marketing. I always wanted to run garage sales and, always had ideas and all of that sort of thing. So when I left school, I sort of got involved in doing a lot of sales. And I had a number of sales roles up until I turned, everything from door-to-door sales to cold call telemarketing to corporate sales, right across the board. And then when I was around 24, I saw, my wife actually saw, she was my girlfriend then, but she saw a job for a copywriter. She's like, because I'd started up as a marketing consultant. I'd done Jay Abraham's seminar when I was 17, and my mind just popped. And then 7 years later, I thought, okay, I'm going to go out as a marketing consultant. And she saw this role for a copywriter. You should go for that. So I went for that. And long story short, I didn't get the job, but I got the confidence because the HR manager didn't like let's just say I'd had a lot of different roles and jumped around a lot up until then. But the copywriting manager really liked me. And I thought, so that's when I specialized in copywriting. And my business from that moment, I think which taught me a lot about the power of niching. It would have, admittedly from a low base at the time, but it 10x'd overnight once I found that niche. And I found I was naturally strong at it. And I got a little bit lucky, hit the market at the right time. And the rest is I've now been sort of specialized in that area for over 20 years. And I built my business throughout that time. I went for a seminar where I saw Matt Fury, and I ended up buying his email marketing course, which is all about sending an email a day. So I just did that consistently. I built my list and I got lots of business out of it. And I've been doing it really, I think I'd send an email a day for 10 years, every weekday. Maybe I missed one day during that time, but I was very consistent. And then I probably send less emails now just from a capacity perspective. But it's been incredible for me and for my clients.
Amazing. I'm really interested in that strategy. But before we get into that, let's go back to how do you even start creating an email list? Now, I know I've built up an email list over time. I've lived in different cities. I've had different jobs. I've had different roles. And so I've been able to build it up and make those connections. And for me, it's great because then even if I haven't spoken to somebody, but they see an email that I send that resonates with them, then they reach out and then we continue that relationship. But it took me a long time to build up my list. And I have a lot of grad students who are going into digital marketing, and they're wondering, how do they even start? How do you start building up that list and growing an audience?
Yeah, great question. So one of the really, I guess you need first is some sort of a report or document you can offer in exchange for the email list. So for people to join your email list. So the best way to identify what report that is to, understand your target market and what they actually want to know. And then one of the beauties today in terms of creating those reports is with AI, you can now create them faster than ever. And you can actually have not just one report, but multiple reports. So just hypothetically, if you're a digital marketing agency, you could have a report on Google AdWords, you could have one on YouTube advertising, you could have one on TikTok, you could have one on automation, right across the board. So you're identifying what your clients' interests are and give that report the right name and make sure it's hitting on the hot buttons that your clients want to do. And then you create what's called a landing page or a squeeze page for people to download it. So from there, when you place, for example, content, which is a very simple way, you can then say, hey, for more information about this, go and download my report. Or you could be on podcasts like this, and then at the end of it, you'd say, if you'd like to know more, go and download this report, and so on. So that's really how you build out the email list. And obviously you can advertise that as well. So you can run ads to get people to download the report or do joint venture and reciprocal relationships to, like, I think someone sent an email out for me the other day and I've added 20 or 30 people to my email list as a result of that.
Amazing. And I will say, yeah, I did go and download your offer that we're going to be putting in the show notes so that I could look at it as well. I love learning. I feel like I get to learn as much about things that are going on and what's working and what's not working as my audience. So it's really exciting. Now let's go to the fact that you sent an email a day. I feel like email boxes get so cluttered these days, right? So how do you cut through all the other emails somebody is getting? Well, I just downloaded a program to help me organize my inbox. I still haven't had time to actually implement it yet. But, you get a lot of emails that you're like, okay, I can look at this later. It's not really something I need to look at right now, or I need to unsubscribe. They're sending me too much stuff. So how are you able to create really compelling emails that keep people on your list, even after 10 years of getting daily, weekday emails from you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the really key thing is to understand the conversation that's going on in your customer's mind. And how do you actually do that? Well, the first thing, what I would recommend doing is surveying them and asking them. And a couple of questions that you might want to ask, what's your biggest challenge with your niche? So in my case, it might be they're getting more customers, but it could be something totally different depending on what business you're in. And then asking, hey, if you could ask me any 2 questions about copywriting, in my case, what would they be? And you will get the answers back, and that will sort of guide you on what you should say, so that where Robert Collier Letter Book, which is like a famous advertising book from way back, said, the number one thing you need to do is enter the conversation going on in your customer's mind. So that's really number one. Number 2, I think, is, being personal and not being afraid to share your story and, expose your Achilles heel and be like real and authentic. So your client can actually develop that relationship with you. So, because I think email is one of the more intimate relationships. I don't think that agnostic in the fact that I'm like, hey, it's only email. I think you want to be out there with your content marketing, you want to be out there, with blogging and social media and that sort of thing as well. But I find that, when it comes to actually generating sales and where the email, according to litmus.com, gets a 36-to-1 ROI for every dollar invested. And the other powerful thing about email is that you actually own the list. So whereas with social media, we've seen this particularly, in recent years, you could have a massive following and you could disappear overnight. I've had clients in like the health space, and even from like they disappeared off Google, or they were, like their reach online is like probably 3% of what it was 5 years ago, but they have an email list of millions, and that is really the foundation, which has allowed them to maintain their business. So yeah,
I love that you brought that up. I think I read an article recently that said when you post on social media, it's getting served to about 1% of your audience, unless you use advertising and boost your posts and use these other techniques, because there's just so much clutter. And ultimately, these companies that we rely on to speak to people through social media, they don't want people to go away from their sites. They want people to engage on their sites, and they also want to make money, right? So I think one of the things that people wrestle with a lot, though, is converting people from, for instance, social media into owned media. So getting people not stop looking at what you're posting, but actually interact with you and provide that email address so that you can then nurture them through the system of having that deeper connection.
Yes, 100%. And I think there's different ways of doing this to move them across. One of those is that you can supply some great content. I call it the third way, which you can use in email marketing, but you can also use in your socials, where you supply, because what most people fall into with email is they'll either go out and they'll just blast their list with like sales, what I call the scorched earth approach. So it can generate sales. Yeah, you burn the asset, which can keep paying you, or they do the love letters approach, where they're just sending out great content, but they never ask for anything in return. I like to go down the middle, where you can occasionally do sales emails, but where you're providing content and you have gentle call to actions within each email. And one of the best ways to do that is to really tease within the copy. So the same thing applies to your socials. So for example, I might go out with an email, for example, which gives some great value. I might say something like, one of the best ways to write a headline is to inspire curiosity, because if you inspire curiosity, that gets people to want to open, say, your email to find out more. And the human mind is driven by curiosity, and the reasons are because it's part of our survival instinct, and we could go into that, the whole reason behind curiosity. And then at the end of that, I can say there's one word which drives curiosity more than anything else, which I love using in my email. That's a 4-letter word. And I've actually explained, I have a report I've created on why this word is so powerful, which you can download now to find out what that word is and why it's so powerful. And that inspires curiosity, right? It's like, I want to download that report. So, and that report does not need to be long. That report could be a one-pager. That report could be, I've never seen this done, but it could even be one word with a paragraph as to why that word is so powerful, right? Because as long as it's valuable and people go, wow, that's incredible, then they're going to feel happy to have downloaded that report. Your reports don't need to be books, in other words.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a really good point, because I think that people get that paralysis, right, of it needs to be perfect and overthinking it instead of just doing it sometimes.
Yes. Yeah. And important thing to keep in mind, like, in terms of the reports as well, like, is there something when you share it, people are like, wow, I didn't know that. That's incredible. And that could be just shared in a conversation. It could take you 30 seconds to share, or a minute to share, or that sort of thing. So reports can be checklists, they can be quite short and sharp. They can be longer as well, but you don't get paralyzed by going, oh, that's going to take me 3 months to write that. It can actually be, quite fast.
I want to flag something that you talked about in terms of you had different careers, you had different job titles, and HR didn't particularly care for that. And then you really found your niche. And I think there's a lot of, because I'm more of a probably generalist, I know a lot about a couple of things, and I know a little bit about a lot of things. What I like about that is that then I can kind of understand how we need to work with other teams or other people to get to a client's end goal. And you did also mention that while you are specifically focused on this area of content, you also believe in the value of everything else. So what does that look like for you? Do you work in those other fields? Do you have preferred partners? Do you work with companies, teams to say, hey, this is what we need to do for this, but make sure that you have this, this, and this to back up what we're messaging?
That's a great question. And I think that broadness of knowledge is really important. So I like the concept of having you have a specialization, but you also understand it, because otherwise you don't understand where that specialization fits in with the whole picture. And I think we see this in a lot of different industries at the moment, where people are almost over-specialized, but they don't necessarily see the full picture. So then, they're just worried about this one thing, but not clear on how it actually impacts the whole. And from when we look at this in marketing, like one of the things I worked out years ago, even within my own business, I looked at where all my best clients were coming from at the time. And I'm like, for a decent part of my business, I'm actually not selling to people, I'm selling through people. So there's other agencies, for example, who will refer me, or I'll come in as part of that team. And so it was probably about 4 or 5 years ago, I started a group, which is, arguably one of the top sort of specified marketing groups in Australia, called Elite Marketers, where we have training sessions every month and we have a couple of physical get-togethers every year. And that really keeps me on top of, personally, what are all the different marketing strategies that are out there, which I think is critical because there's so much you can do. You can be doing, you can be doing podcasts, you can be doing LinkedIn. There's different ways of using Facebook groups. So we need to be, I think, aware and conscious of all those strategies, because copywriting, itself is an email marketing, fits in there, but you also need to know everything that surrounds it. So how do we actually take, and what are the assets? One of the first things I look at within a company when I'm dealing with them is what are the actual assets that they have? So if they've got an email marketing list, I like to start there, because that's like the low-hanging fruit, particularly if it's been nurtured. And it's far easier to convert that than it is to start up a whole, Facebook ads funnel going to cold traffic, for example. But if they don't have that asset, and instead they've got a huge social media following, then you need a different approach. So I think it's having that generalist big picture view. I look at it as a bit like a chessboard. You have to assess the board before you know which move to actually make.
Yeah. That's such a good point. And I think a lot of times people just see whatever the person they heard most recently in an ad or in a group, right? And they're like, okay, that's the strategy I need to use, but it might not be the right strategy for them. So I love the fact that you're talking about really assessing the landscape of assets and available tangible items and messaging, and then taking a step back and saying, okay, you're not quite ready for this. Let's convert here to build up your list first.
Yes, 100%. 100%. I think that is just so, it's so critical, because it's all very well to go, I don't know, you go to a webinar about TikTok, for example, and then you're like obsessed, hey, I need to become a TikTok star and get millions of views on TikTok. And maybe you do, but maybe you've got an email list of thousands that you could tap into first, which is going to give you a far better, more predictable ROI, as an example. So it's so much about the same with anything in life. You assess your asset. If you're at university, you're going, well, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What are my opportunities? What are my threats? If you're particularly good with people, then maybe you need to do something different than if you're particularly analytical, that sort of thing. So it's very much assessing where you're at before making that decision.
Yeah. So what does it look like when a client comes to work with you? Do you start with the assessment, then do you do that before you decide whether you're going to work with them or not?
So I tend to really ask a lot of questions. I look at it the same as if you go to any professional, like if you're going to an accountant or a lawyer or that sort of thing, where you've got to assess what the situation is, right? So where are they at? What assets do they have at their disposal? And then you're deciding, okay, based on that, how can we help? I'm generally going in and looking for that strategy, which is initially, like what's the low-hanging fruit where we can put some money back into their pocket. And then obviously the big picture is really critical. So it depends on where the client is at. If they're a really established business and all that sort of thing, you might go, okay, let's take a step back and let's play a really long game. If they're a smaller business and cash flow is really important to them, what's some quick wins we can have to put some money in their pocket so that they can play the long game, so to speak. So it's very much an assessment of that. Yeah. So if they've got, let's say, a large sales team, their sales team, aren't converting, for example, it's going to be a very different strategy than someone who's got an email list of, 30,000 and they're emailing it out, but that's not converting. So you're really assessing where they're at before giving advice. The same as if you're a medical professional, you want to find out if they've got, respiratory issues or heart issues or a sore back, right? That's going to change the advice that you're going to give someone.
Definitely. And is there the size of client that you usually work with? It sounds like you have something for every level, because I know you have the freebies and other things, but what's your sweet spot?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work with clients right across different levels. I find that clients who stick over the long term are often just because there's more leverage, right? So they'll often be like, for my consulting service, they might be like a 7-figure business where they're a bit more established and we can get momentum faster. But really across the board, like over the last 12 months, we've been doing a lot of website copy for builders, like where we're bringing them, just helping them to really establish their presence online and that sort of thing. So I'm quite flexible in that regard. And then we've got programs we're in the process of delivering that can help any sort of small, medium business to grow. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I know you talked about sending emails out every day of the week during the work week. And you also talked about getting inside the head of the consumer to try to figure out what's going to be the hook that's going to keep them interested. And you talked about asking questions and surveys. What are some other techniques that people can use, or what are some things that help with compelling storytelling to keep people wanting to come back every day to read your email?
I think one of the best things that I found was just being aware of your thoughts throughout the day and your conversations throughout the day. So like you'll be, because often you'll have thoughts and you'll go, oh, that could be really good for an email. And so I used to just put them in my phone. And as soon as your reticular activating system is like, hey, I want to send emails, whether it's daily or weekly or monthly, as soon as your reticular activating system is on, and the reticular activating system is that thing in your brain where you say, hey, I want to buy a specific type of car, and you see that car everywhere. With email, as soon as you say, hey, I want to send regular emails, you'll get those thoughts, you'll get those ideas, you'll have conversations with your clients, and they'll ask you a question and you'll go, oh, that's perfect. That'd be perfect to add into an email. And then from there, you're writing one of the best ways to do things is to what I call, and I got this from Matt Fury, where it's like talk, write, talk, write. So you talk it, then you write it, then you talk it, then you write it. Now, one of the things you can do now with AI, which can speed things up, and I've developed a process for this, is where what you do with the emails is you can talk it like into something like otter.ai and use that transcript to provide the foundation of the email, and then get the AI to write that, something like ChatGPT to write that for you, with the right prompts. And I developed that because what I found was, I would talk to some people, even marketers, and they're like, oh, it takes me 2 hours to write an email. I'm like, that's crazy. It would take me maybe 15 minutes to write an email. So I thought, well, there needs to be a way to do it, and via technology now, to do it actually faster so that you can write them more regularly. Because it's hard if you're running a business and it's taking you 2 hours to write an email. It's hard to justify that time if you've got a small list to actually put that out. But even with a small list, if you're able to do them a lot faster in terms of punching those emails out, even if you've got a list of 50 or 100 people, you got to remember, you're actually getting your name, even if they don't open and click on the email, your name is being recognized by 50 people who are in the sweet spot of your target market. That's incredibly powerful. And people get obsessed, Annika, with this whole thing of having a large email list. And I've seen it. I mean, the first time that really made my jaw drop, I used to have a list of it was around about 7,000. There's around about 200 or 180 paid people on that list who are subscribing to a newsletter. I think it was $67 a month or something at the time. And I did this launch and we made about 42 sales at $1,000 from this launch. And when I actually went through and went, okay, where did those sales come from? And I dissected it, 80% of those sales came from the 180. Might have even been 90%, like the vast majority of those sales came from the 180, and only a fraction of that come from those 6,800. So it's not always about the list. I know joint venture partners got a better response from an email list of 50 people than they have from a list of 10,000 people. So it's very much about the quality of your list, not necessarily the size of your list.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's such an important thing for people to think through, is it's really about finding the right customer at the right time, not, the general list of people who you might know, but who don't want to buy from you. They don't have that. Their particular activator hasn't been activated. They're not interested right now. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. 100%. It's all about, I think we get obsessed with quantity in our society rather than quality. Like even with social media, right? I've gone through times where, you'll do all the Gary Vaynerchuk where you're posting. Don't get me wrong, that strategy can work. But what I've personally found has worked far better than me than getting, you get an email where or let's say a post and you get, thousands of views, or you get like 8,000 views and you feel good about that, and that your post has gone somewhat, semi-viral. But I've found when it actually comes to the rubber meets the road, it's those deep relationships which have far more impact. Like I have clients, a number of colleagues who've sent me, well in excess of, 6 figures worth of business. I made one cold call over, it was probably 17 years ago, and that's been worth 7 figures worth of business. So it's not necessarily all your perception online where people are like, oh, you've got a big following and all that sort of thing. I know people have got a huge social media following online and they're not making virtually anything out of it. So also look at like the deep relationships, the deep connections, and nurturing them. And then obviously delivering an incredible service so that people actually come back to you. I think they're really important things, to factor in.
Yeah. And you mentioned AI, which is something that everybody's thinking about. One school of thought is, oh, AI is going to take our jobs. The other school of thought is, no, it's actually just a very useful tool, but you still have to have the human element because AI can't add in all the things, the idiosyncrasies that we have in our brains that sound like a human, like a person is relating to you, right? So you mentioned that you have a course and a system that you've created. So I'd love for you to talk about AI, because since you've been in this field for so long, I'm sure you've seen a lot of changes. I'd love to hear about your takes on AI, when you started using it or realizing it would be perhaps useful, and then tell us a little bit more about the course that you created.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was quite skeptical initially about AI, and I was sort of on the front foot before like the whole ChatGPT craze and it went viral and that sort of thing. So that was sort of probably 2/3 of the way through last year. One of my colleagues was like, hey, you should check out this. And initially I was like, I wasn't big on it. But then I started to play around with it, and this was with Jasper, right? And it was like, oh, this is actually quite good, and it's coming back, and it's like it's giving some form of quality. So I sort of delved into it and created some formulas for using Jasper. And then ChatGPT came along the next year. And I was a bit skeptical about ChatGPT in terms of how it could work because I was somewhat attached to the formulas I already had. But then I started to use it and I'm like, wow, this is like 10 times better. So now I primarily use ChatGPT, and it's almost like a third hand, if you like. Yeah, if it's missing or if it wasn't to work, it would definitely slow me down in terms of my day-to-day work. I use it like all the time. It's incredible for writing emails. It's incredible for writing reports. I'll use it where we create whole core stories for clients and unique selling propositions where we're interviewing and then incorporating them with AI. But you need to know how to, the specifics of how to use it. Because if you don't know how to use it, it will just knock out it'll write the words fast, but it'll just be generic sort of nonsense, which isn't going to cut through, right? If it's not used well. And obviously everyone can knock out generic nonsense. So you need to know how to use it. And I align it a little bit like there's another software which does things on the visual side, like the art side. The name of it escapes me at the moment. Like an artist can do far more with that than what I can because they know the questions to ask it. They know the prompts. They know who the good artists are. They know who's good at certain types of art, and they know what photography shots do it on or what angles or all of that sort of thing. So I don't have that knowledge. So I can't create that sort of art. I can still go in there and create something which is half decent, but not to that level. And it's the same with ChatGPT. You've got to understand and get that foundational knowledge on how to use it in order to really leverage it to its maximum. So that's why I created the course so that people could actually get the most out of it and had a strategy to actually get results, not just it's like if you've got an AI that could put up bricks really fast, right? That's useful, but you got to know what house you want to build. And there's a lot of other elements that need to go into it before you just start throwing up bricks. Otherwise, you just end up with a pile of random bricks, not a home.
That's such a great analogy. I have to noodle on that for a minute. Because I'm still, of course, I feel like we're always still learning how to best use all of the new technology, right? How to use prompts. And in your course, it's an online course that people can take in their own time?
Yes, so it's an online course that people can take in their own time that I've developed. So next year, we will be launching where I'll be taking people through, and there'll be like a coaching component, and there'll probably be a done for you component option and done with you component options as well to that. So the speed that you can move at when you actually have understand how to use this technology, is just phenomenal. And it's a bit of a hybrid approach, right? Where you're using the human mind, you're using your human mind, and the computer is really, really critical to get the best results. So there's nothing really that I do with AI which doesn't also include like transcripts and interviews and all of that sort of thing, because otherwise you're just punching out what anyone can punch out. But like if you're going to create a report with AI, use your knowledge, and then you got to know how to structure that report to get the right knowledge out of it. And then it's got to be your words that go in. Otherwise, let's say you're creating a report on branding, it's just going to be a generic report that could be replicated by 100 different people. It's not going to be your years of expertise and your decades of expertise, and your unique stamp on it is really critical. So you need to be directing the AI, because the AI, as intelligent as it is, it's also quite stupid in many ways. Like it can't think for itself, or not yet anyway. So it needs us to direct it in order to get the right result out of it. And the important thing to remember with AI as well is I heard this analogy like with Excel, right? Excel can do amazing things, but most people, if you ask them to do, including myself, pivot table on Excel, they're like, oh, how do you do that? Right? So we don't necessarily know all of these amazing things that it can do. Most people might be able to do a sum and they can enter some numbers in there, and that's about it. And I'm finding it's very similar with AI, is that people just don't know how to use it and how to get the most out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. What's the use of having all of these tools if we don't actually take the time to learn how to use them as assets, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is immediately probably easier to use in Excel and that sort of thing, but you really need to know how to use it. And I think it's even more important within your profession to learn the framework. So, for example, one of the things that I can do with AI is I can say, hey, write like, the more guidance you give it. So if I tell it to write like, Gary Ben's Avenger, who's one copywriter, or I get it to write like Matt Fury, who's another one, or Claude Hopkins, who's another one, it's going to give me a very different result that it'll punch out. And likewise, if I have frameworks and I get it to write like a particular type of sales letter or a funnel, or I can pull the context and say, hey, write it like, here is a sample, write it in a similar way. So the more frameworks you have to pull from, the high level frameworks, the more you could do with the tool. And it's the same with the branding or anything. If you know particular branding frameworks, you can get it to create it within that, a similar framework to it. But if you don't know what that framework is, well, you can't tell it what you don't know. So that foundational knowledge and understanding of your trade is probably more important than ever.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I have a question about emails and email marketing and newsletters. I see this a lot with marketers or with people who don't have a lot of time, right? So we'll throw like a long list of like, here's where we are and here's what we're doing, and a long list of things into an email or into a marketing brochure or on social media or on our website. But then you also get the emails that are more simple messages that aren't in they're just an email. They're not with a huge, beautiful headline and all these different things that you have to click through to see this or that or video or whatever. Do they both have a place? And should people be thinking about those two types of emails as different reasons, right? Or different audiences?
Yeah, I do think they both have a place. Like I know some clients where they'll send it out and they'll have lots of links and lots of different things for people to click on and that sort of thing. So, and that does work for them. I prefer the shorter sort of personality-driven emails where you can open it up and you can get a tip or an idea, and that can drive you towards a decision. So the way I like to do emails is where you can break up all your topics, like even by, let's say, a 10 by 10 strategy where you say, okay, what are 10 topics that we could talk about under branding or under email marketing or under copywriting? So, I could talk about headlines, or I could talk about sales funnels, or I could talk about, automation after generate a lead, or how to follow up with email after an event, or all of these sort of different topics. Then I could do 10 subtopics underneath that. So all of a sudden you've got 100 topics, and you can use AI to actually brainstorm. It's a fantastic brainstorming buddy. So brainstorm all of these topics as well. So, and then doing sort of more, just because people are quite busy, it's more like short, sharp conversations with a call to action to go to the next step. So for example, breaking it up into buckets, I think is a really good idea as well. So a guy I'm helping he does web design. I think he does, like, his buckets ended up being web design, CRM, SEO, and it might have been digital marketing strategies. So he's got those 3 or 4 buckets, right? So then you have content around those 3 or 4 buckets. And at the end of those emails, you can send them to download a report. So once they've downloaded a report, they can get taken off the main list, and they could get emails specifically about CRM to drop them into an appointment for a meeting about CRM. And if they don't respond to that, then they go back onto the main list, where again, on the main list, they give options for them to opt in, and then it circles back around and around. And some people are like, well, why do you get people to opt in when they're already on your email list? But it's a next level of engagement and commitment. And you can also get their phone number at that stage, right? So if I download a report on your CRM, then I can, you can ask for the phone number at that stage, and you can have someone follow them up and say, hey, Annika, what did you think of the report? And that can then open up a dialogue, which can then move to a sales meeting and to the next level. Because if you're incorporating multiple modalities, like you could even ask for the address, right? You could physically post out the report. And so if you get the more modalities you can come at people with, the better. So if you can get them physical, phone, email, social, right across the board, and I'm seeing you all over the place, you're all of a sudden omnipresent, and the trust level developed. This is a big thing. Like the big thing, I saw a quote recently, whereas the asset in the 21st century isn't necessarily attention, it's trust. So how do you develop trust? Well, in some ways, you've got to get someone's attention first before you develop trust. But one of the things, there's a book called They Ask You Answer. And one thing he found is if someone absorbed 30 or more pieces of content, the conversion rate jumped from, and he was selling swimming pools, but the conversion rate in the sales meeting jumped from 10% to 80% if they had absorbed that much content. He was doing blogging, but the same principles apply whether they're watching your YouTube videos, listening to you on podcasts, or that sort of thing. That's where things like podcasting are so powerful, right? Because one piece of content could be equivalent to like 5 or 10 blogs or emails or that sort of thing. So the more you can, or events, like people run half-day events or full-day events or 3-hour events, and then they'll be selling a $5,000 or $10,000 coaching program on the back end. The reason they're able to do that is because they've given themselves enough time to build up trust. So the question is, how can we get enough time with our prospects where we're sharing expertise and also, stuff which isn't necessarily just professional, but it's relational, and building that relationship to where they trust us to make a buying decision.
Yeah, I love that. You see so many things where people have an ad you click on social media because they're going to share something that you're like, oh, I'm interested in that topic. You go to a thing and that ends up being a sales seminar, but they're not really giving you the data. So I love the fact that you're talking about actually nurturing the lead before you might not even know that they're a lead, right? They might be on your email list, they might not be, but all these different touch points and the fact that you build up so they know that you actually do have this foundation of knowledge that they want, and you're going to share it a little bit. You're not going to just tease them and not give them tangible, actionable steps.
Yeah, because it's so really, like when you start to do things like I do like buyer persona interviews for clients, right, as well, which is something I learned from Adele Ravella. She's got a book on the topic. But the whole thing, that's based on actually calling your clients and having conversations and finding out what the conversation going on in their mind is during that buying process. And most people, even when you're selling to a client, you actually don't know what that is, right? Because it's just not a discussion you have, and they're generally not open to it, or it's just not right to have that conversation at that time. So you're finding out like what's their decision criteria, what's their buying process, what instigated them to even consider making that decision. And you generally find when going through that process that there's a lot of depth to it and there's a lot of trust involved. Like I was speaking to someone the other day and she's like, I looked at all their testimonials and I even called some of the people and found out. So there's a lot going on during that buying process. It's not generally just, or they might come from referrals or connections, or it's taken a long time to get to that. So it's generally not, I saw it out on Facebook and I just bought. Sometimes it is, but there's generally a lot of research going on in the back end. And the way we buy now is very different too, because we can do that research. So previously, like I had a client and he would obsess about his Yellow Pages ad. This is a long time ago, like 17 years ago or something, when I I started working with him, and he says about his Yellow Pages ad, and that was it. And then because that was where most of his business was coming from, right? So he'd do that, then he was right for the year. Whereas now what people are doing is they're jumping online, they're doing their research, and they've already somewhat made their decision before they reach you. And that's why it is so important to be in there before that buying decision is made. Like one of the analogies, I work with quite a few builders. I said, well, if you got a client, like your best prospect to reach, to call you today, would you send out an apprentice? And they're like, of course I wouldn't. Well, I said, but what's happening is the first stage of the sales process is they're going online. So you're not even getting the phone call. So are you sending out an apprentice or are you sending out a professional? So, and to solve that problem, you actually need to get really good at being the professional, or you need to hire help to help you put out that social presence where you are really seen. And when I say that presence, that includes, it includes the socials, it includes the emails, it includes everything right across the board.
Yeah. Wow. I feel like we've covered so much, and there's still so much to uncover. So I would like to know two things. One is, do you have a favorite quote, mantra, words of wisdom, family motto?
I think one of the quotes I heard years ago is, you need to be smart enough to know when you're getting lucky. And I think that that's a really powerful quote in marketing, because I've talked to people over the years and you'll hear, they'll be like, oh yeah, I put $1 into this advertising campaign and I get $1.50 back. But they're not excited by that. And I'm like, you're sitting on a gold mine. You just need to put more into this and work on your back end and do that. And you could turn this into like a huge business because you've got the foundations there. But it's almost like this level of experience where you go, wow, that is really incredible. What we've created here, I can leverage that. So what I'd encourage anyone listening to this is go, where am I getting lucky that I don't even realize it, that I can actually leverage and use that as a catapult. And sometimes that only comes later in your career when you can see it, or after you've actually been through pain. So it's like the person who's been through like 5 terrible relationships and they find someone who's good. They might not have appreciated that early on, but because they haven't experienced the alternative. And I know when I got into copywriting, one of the things I'd been through the pain of not having an offer or an offering that really stuck, where people went, wow, to having it. And I'm like, I'm onto something. So that was just something to consider. A long answer to your question, but yeah, that is something I found quite profound.
Fantastic. And I know you have a free ebook, 101 Subject Line Hacks. I'll be putting the link in the show notes, copywritingthatsells.com, a few / because you're in Australia. So I will put that in the show notes. But is that the best way for people to find and follow you and learn more about the work you do? Would you like them to connect with you on LinkedIn or somewhere else?
Yeah, so they can go to my website, the copywritingthatsells.com.au, or or grab the 101 headline hacks. I've also got a report specifically on AI, which is it's got all the prompts and that sort of thing that I use for email, which is simpleemailroi.com/AI. And or follow me on my socials. If you look up Scott Bywater, you'll find me on, LinkedIn is probably one of the best spots to go. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, there's so much more we could cover, but I like to keep, within a certain range for my listeners. So I really appreciate the fact that you got up early, had this conversation, loved meeting you, Scott, and you've given us so much information to think about and really actionable, tangible steps to take for our email marketing. So thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, likewise, Annika. It's been great. And thanks for being an amazing host.
Oh, thank you. And thank you to my watchers and listeners for coming back for another amazing episode. I'll be back again in a few days with another fantastic expert to share their knowledge with you and help you make your business better. Want more? Check out amplifywithannika.com or follow me on socials at amplifywithannika.